Broadcasting from our studio in Boston, Solutions Review is proud to showcase Software One in the Solution Spotlight, an inside look at enterprise technologies.
I'm Doug Atkinson here at Solutions Review, and welcome to this Solution Spotlight featuring Software One and focused on data connectors for Microsoft Sentinel. If you're facing the challenge of integrating diverse data sources for effective security monitoring, today we will share with you 5 always free data connectors for Microsoft Sentinel, as well as a comprehensive look at how data is initially ingested in the Sentinel platform and additional benefits available to certain Microsoft 365 licenses. This spotlight is an opportunity for us to dive into the realm of third-party cloud applications and their built-in connectors, simplifying event logging and data integration into Sentinel. To walk us through the presentation today, I will hand this over to Matt Vest, Security Professional Team Lead at Software One. Matt, the floor is yours.
Let's go ahead also and jump in. So at Software One, we always start every presentation we do with our core values. So you can see we have 7 of them there, all of which are important. But for purposes of our conversation today, I chose customer focus. The objective and goal of our time together here today is to deliver some information, and hopefully this will be valuable and help our customers kind of understand what the platform is used for, how they can get value from it, and a little bit more detail about how kind of implementation and how it works on the back end a little bit as well. So that's the focus that I took towards or within this conversation here today. So to run through our agenda, first we're gonna just kind of talk through SIEM generally, understand a little bit of kind of what the purpose is of a SIEM, what it does, why you may need one, and then talk a little bit more specifically about Microsoft Sentinel, the basics of how it works. Then we're going to dive into the 5 different connector types that we want to discuss. I should note, I think this is probably inclusive of pretty much every connector type, at least kind of broadly categorized. There may be an exception here or there, which we'll talk through as we get to them, but should be able to cover pretty much everything there. And then we'll close it out with just a quick wrap up and kind of some next steps. So that's the plan. We'll go ahead and jump in and start talking about SIEM. So SIEM is a term that you hear thrown around quite a bit in the security landscape for different organizations. Traditionally a tool that large organizations were leveraging, but is becoming more and more necessary and certainly feasible for even smaller or certainly mid-sized organizations to have a SIEM deployed as well. So the acronym for SIEM stands for Security, Information, and Event Management. Think of it as a centralized logging point where you can point all of your different applications or points of entry to an organization, and kind of collate those logs in a single area where we can then begin to apply some intelligence and sort of group different pieces of information together, right? So rather than just looking at, for example, looking at our Azure AD sign-in logs, we also want to know about our server sign-in logs through Active Directory, maybe some third-party cloud applications that aren't integrated via SSO that we need to know about as well, right? So being able to link all of those together helps us to understand a much more complete picture of what's going on in an organization, especially when it comes to a potential attack or a potential vulnerability that we need to stay on top of and be aware of and even take some action on. And then finally, speaking to that action point, in addition to having the data and being able to look at and potentially take some type of manual action, the SIEM platform and Sentinel specifically also give us the ability to automate certain action or response types. And the true value of that is bringing that time to response way down in terms of the amount of time that an account or a resource or an issue is exposed. So being able to lessen that, dramatically improves kind of our overall security posture, which is certainly the goal of what we're trying to accomplish when we're talking about having a SIEM deployed. So just to dig into Microsoft Sentinel more specifically, I talk a little bit about kind of the setup and configuration, at least at a broad level. So Sentinel is configured in the Microsoft Azure portal. It is billed under an Azure subscription, and that billing is based on both the amount of data that is ingested into the platform, so the logs that you're ultimately doing your analysis on, as well as the threat intelligence that then is potentially applied to those logs as well. The billing is a much more complex process than we have time to get into here today, but understand just kind of at a core level that billing happens under an Azure subscription, and there's kind of two different points at which that billing can happen as well. We'll talk a little bit more about that as we go through the connectors, but as you can tell, that's a bit of a more complex issue. I just wanted to make sure we had kind of a foundational understanding of how that works. We pull data into the Sentinel service by using a log analytics workspace. So log analytics is used for all kinds of other uses potentially in Azure as well. But your Sentinel workspace actually sits on top of, or your Sentinel threat intelligence actually sits on top of that log analytics workspace. So you do need to provision a log analytics workspace in that Azure subscription as well, in order to then turn on and start leveraging Sentinel. And that's ultimately where the data actually comes in. That's where we point all of our logs to stream into that analytics service to then apply the appropriate intelligence and begin to take action accordingly. The concept, and this is what we're going to talk a lot more about, for bringing actual data into the service is defined using data connectors. This number shows 97 connectors. I was looking the other day, there's actually something more like 220 kind of pre-built connectors that you can add from the gallery. And this spans all the way from Microsoft connectors to third parties to network appliances. Again, we're going to drill down into that in a little bit more detail as we go. But these are very quickly and easily set up for you to be able to select from the gallery, add those connectors into your Sentinel workspace, and then begin to pull that data in and take very quick or very quickly begin to get visibility into what's happening from a potential threat landscape perspective. And then additionally, and we're not going to go as deep into this today, but it's important to understand, once you have the data coming into the platform, then you can begin to really apply the intelligence on top of that. So I chose to highlight workbooks here specifically. Workbooks kind of give you the ability to visualize the data that is coming into the platform really effectively. And then also, have the ability to, for example, apply automation to certain types of incidents. So some type of alert that comes in, say, a compromised credential, you could actually have an automation service that takes action on that potential compromise without anybody any kind of security analyst or anybody on the IT team needing to take any action, right? It just automatically happens. And then, of course, retroactively, we need that alert to be investigated to confirm the compromise was in fact legitimate. But again, getting back to the concept of minimizing that time to response, when that action is automated and not requiring even any approval from our security analysts, we dramatically lessen the potential time that a compromise can be problematic. Obviously, that's one of those great power and great responsibility conversations. So you do want to be very careful about how you set those automations up. But that's where you really start to unlock the power and increase the security that the Sentinel platform can offer as well. So that's kind of the core setup and foundation. What I'd like to do now is transition a little bit and talk about the 5 different sort of major connector types that we see integrated into Sentinel on a regular basis. And like I said, this won't necessarily be exhaustive. Most everything I think fits into one of these buckets, but there may be some fringe or edge cases that I'm not covering here. But again, with customers that we work with, these are the most common connectors that we see pulled into the platform to then run the analysis on. So first, and this is probably somewhat obvious, but we'll talk about the Microsoft Cloud connectors. So there's a variety of different, cloud services that can be integrated into the platform. Azure Activity, Azure AD Sign-In logs, identity protection, of course, all of the Defender products and capabilities. These are all really simple to bring into the threat intelligence service with basically a single click of a button. Right, you just need to be, you need some administrative rights in the platform and the service that you're looking to integrate. But it's in many cases as simple as a single button click, if not just a few approvals that you need to step through, and you're immediately pulling that data into the platform to begin to take analysis on it. And you see this a little bit with the Defender portal today as well, but having all of those different data points, again, aggregated into a single spot lets you get a much more complete picture of what's going on within your organization on a day-to-day basis, and really empowers our security analysts or IT team to then be able to have much better insight into what's happening across the entirety of that Microsoft Cloud estate. Another important note that I want to make here, we talked a little bit about cost, but it is worth noting that there are a couple of connectors that are always free for the Sentinel threat intelligence. That doesn't cover the ingestion portion of these logs necessarily, but your Azure Activity logs, your O365 audit logs, and the Defender for Cloud, Defender for Identity, Defender for Office 365, Defender for Endpoint, and Defender for Cloud Apps, all of which are different services, but each of those, again, the threat intelligence component from Sentinel, always free for each of those. And then depending on your licensing position in the Microsoft Cloud, there are some additional benefits as well, especially for E5 customers. There's additional connectors that are sort of provided free for threat intelligence. And then there's also some additional retention that you can turn on and activate as well. And again, retention isn't something that we're really going deep on here. 30 days of retention is kind of provided by default. Obviously, you can extend that, but then you do get into some storage and retention costs that you need to be cognizant and thoughtful of as well. So there's a variety of different ways that we can kind of tune that and design that once we know, or once we've kind of deployed the service and know how much data we're talking about on a day-to-day basis. So that kind of covers the Microsoft Cloud connectors. Those are probably somewhat obvious and pretty simple as well. But I wanted to talk through some of the other connector types that we see commonly deployed as well. So first of all, let's talk about some of the third-party cloud connectors. So these would be other applications, other cloud applications that we may want to integrate the data with into Sentinel as well. You may even be doing something with like Defender for Cloud Apps in the Microsoft portal, where you're bringing like Box or OneDrive or G Suite, something like that. You're doing some session control policies. Being able to also bring that security log data into Sentinel, and then again aggregate that with all of your other data signals that you're getting from your Microsoft services, again, just gives you that much more visibility and insight into what's happening across the organization. Like I mentioned earlier, a lot of these connectors are pre-built and pre-configured. So you can go to that gallery, that application or that data connector gallery, search for the application that you're interested in integrating. Oftentimes it simply requires like an administrator account on that application's side. You authenticate and you're connected. Occasionally there's a little bit more kind of legwork that you have to go through. This may mean, logging into the third-party portal, setting up some, some kind of pointing it to a specific address or service. There's always potentially some additional steps that you need to go through, but it really differs across the environment in terms of what a given application may require. So didn't really break that down or can't really break that down effectively across all the different potentials there, but important to understand that you've got some different steps that you may need to take to integrate some of these apps in. So what you want to do in this area is kind of identify those different connectors that you're interested in integrating. First of all, make sure that they are included in the gallery. Again, you'll find that most applications have already been included in some form or fashion. But then take that and evaluate kind of the difficulty or the integration requirements for each of those third-party apps as you're looking to deploy those. That gives you a little bit better sense of what that looks like. Next up, obviously critical that we want to pull our server logs into our platform as well, into the SIEM. There's a variety of different ways you can do this, but it is important to note, first of all, that we're talking about both Windows Server and Linux servers that we want to pull into this platform. So for Windows servers, we use the Azure Monitor agent as kind of our general approach here. There are some other connectors that are built into the gallery that are event specific. So if you want to target, sign-in audit logs or a specific alert type on a server that is super important or needs to be identified, that can be done on a specific connector rather than by using the general monitor agent. On the Linux side, we typically are using a syslog server. So we'll configure log shipping on the Linux server over to the syslog server environment, and then we'll set up a syslog server connector into Sentinel that will pull those logs in and enable us to turn on the threat intelligence across that set as well. One of the things that's really important to note about this is server logs, as any sysadmin knows, can be very noisy. So it's important to spend some time drilling down and understanding what event log indicators are going to be the most significant or important for us to bring into the platform, and making sure that we're focusing on integrating those most critical logs as to then apply the intelligence service to. That will sort of give us a little bit cleaner data set that we're working from, but B, and potentially just as importantly, also helps to manage the cost. Again, since we're talking about both the ingestion of the data into Sentinel, into the log analytics workspace, and then also the threat intelligence that we layer over top of it, making sure that we have a very good understanding of what that spend, what that monthly cost is going to look like, is really important that we kind of drill down into the most significant events that we want to alert on from our server logs. And just obviously, if you were to not do any of that kind of data hygiene or log analysis conversation ahead of time, if you just dump all of your server logs into Sentinel, you're going to see significant data ingestion costs. And so that's why we obviously focus on making sure that we're picking up kind of the most valuable indicators, pulling that in, and then applying the threat intelligence service to that data that we know we're going to get value from. Then we kind of start to think, we've moved now away from the cloud down into our on-premises, or potentially a cloud-hosted data center, but down to our on-premises organization. The other piece of that on-premises organization that we want to have some visibility and insight into is going to be our network. So obviously understanding what's happening at the network layer is super important for us to kind of have a complete picture of our security posture as well. And so depending on what type of network devices you're using today, there are a variety of pre-built gallery connectors that we can leverage to pull that network logging data into Sentinel as well. So for example, if you use Palo Alto network equipment, there's a Palo Alto connector. Cisco networking equipment has Cisco connectors. There's a variety of different kind of pre-built gallery connectors that will enable us to pull that data in and begin to apply our threat intelligence service on top of that data as well, and aggregate or collate those logs together with the other data types that we've already talked about. And then finally, if you're already doing some kind of centralized network logging, again, a syslog server like we mentioned earlier, or some other type of kind of centralized logging source that you're leveraging for network devices, very likely, almost certainly, that centralized logging source can be pulled into Sentinel as well. So we can pull all the network data that you're already generating into Sentinel and then begin to apply the threat intelligence service there also. The same caveat that we talked about with our servers applies on the network side. Network devices can generate a lot of log data, so making sure that we're focusing on the most valuable, the most critical data points is also going to be important on this network devices conversation. Again, with the primary goal in mind that we really need to make sure we're managing cost as a part of that integration conversation. Then you may have some network devices that don't have a convenient pre-built connector, or maybe you're not doing any centralized network logging today. The final connector type that we can look to deploy is a custom connector. So this is one that is built by the organization and kind of purpose built to the need that you may need to solve here. Almost every organization has at least one application, an in-house application or something that just hasn't been put into the gallery on the Microsoft side yet. So we'll need to know what our options are for how we build these custom connectors in order to get that data into our Sentinel platform as well. So there's a variety of different ways to do these, and different connectors have different sort of value and complexity that they may add. So for example, a codeless connector is much easier to build and deploy, but generally is going to lead to higher costs. Whereas something like an Azure Function or a Logstash connector lets us be a little bit more granular and specific with how we connect that application up, and lets us kind of control and manage that a little bit more, but the complexity goes up. So you always have that kind of, convenience versus complexity trade-off that you're making as you kind of look at the different ways to deploy these connectors. But one of these connector types can typically work for just about every different application, that we would want to pull in and analyze as a part of our Sentinel configuration. And obviously having insight into those third-party applications or these additional applications, in addition to everything else that we've talked about thus far, super critically important, so that again we're looking at a holistic picture of what's happening in our environment today. So those are the 5 different connector types that we wanted to cover, as well as the Sentinel overview that we wanted to share. So that kind of wraps up the presentation that we have put together for you today. I hope this was helpful and informative. If you have any follow-up questions, or want to talk to somebody about what Sentinel deployment may look like in your organization, or anything else kind of cybersecurity focused, especially in the Microsoft stack, but also across the board elsewhere, feel free to take a look at this QR code. This QR code will take you to a book a meeting page where you can share a little bit of information with us, and we'll get someone connected to have a conversation with you about what the next steps may look like for your organization specifically. We'd love to help, start with just a conversation and then potentially help with deploying or building out whatever that solution may look like for you as well. So thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate it. Again, hope you found this valuable and informative, and we hope to hear from you at some point in the future.
So there you have it, another solution in our spotlight. We want to thank Matt Vest and Software One for that presentation, and we appreciate your attention as well. Until next time, I'm Doug Atkinson here at Solutions Review. Thanks for watching.
If your business would like to be featured in a future event, contact us today.